You have like all these different hats and lenses that you look at the space through from, an attorney perspective, pharmacist perspective. How do those different lenses that you're looking through change or affect the way that you look at compounding or personalized medicine?
I think we all come at it from the perspective of what is best for the patients. Can you give proven safety and efficacy to the patient? Can you make sure that what the patient gets is what's best for the patient? A lot of people disagree with me and they say,
Meet Darshan Kulkarni, regulatory and compliance attorney for the life sciences at the Kulkarni Law Firm, with a unique background spanning pharmacy, law, and FDA regulatory strategy. A trusted advisor to life sciences companies, he is also an author, keynote speaker, and host of Darshan Talks.
So when you advise companies in these FDA-regulated industries, what patterns do you keep seeing over and over again?
a variety of issues sort of pop up as commonalities. Some elements go to sort of unapproved claims. And this is true not just for compounders, this is true for like straight up manufacturers, where they're making claims that simply aren't supported by the science. I think peptides have a harder pill to swallow.
What do you think makes peptides uniquely challenging from a legal, regulatory, and even promotional standpoint?
I think
What are the kinds of words that compounders should be careful of when they're describing items in their website or other print materials?
so. The FDA actually has a perspective on this.
Hello and welcome. This is Amy Summers of Restore Health Consulting, and we are actually doing a new podcast. It's called Compounding Interest, the Business of Personalized Medicine. See, I'll get that right one day. But today I'm really excited because we are interviewing a very distinguished attorney slash pharmacist slash extraordinaire, Darshan Kulkarni. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me, Amy. It's really good to be here. My name is Darshan Kulkarni. I am a pharmacist. I'm an attorney. I also have a MS in Quality Assurance Regulatory Affairs. I used to teach at the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy. I now teach at Drexel Law. Written several books. If you see the books behind me, I've written anywhere from 1 through 6 chapters in every single one of them, ranging from pharmacy compounding to medical devices, to advertising and promotional compliance. I have my own law firm that does FDA regulatory law and compliance, focusing exclusively on multi-agency compliance for FDA-regulated industries. So I'm talking about things like, yes, you're looking at what the FDA is saying. What are the state boards of pharmacy saying? What are the state board saying? What is the DOJ OIG saying? And so much more. I also have my own podcast. I have 2 different podcasts, actually. Well, I have several podcasts, but one of them is Darshan Talks, which is really aimed for the average consumer on things that impact their daily lives. And the other end, I have one called KLF Deep Dive, the Kulkarni Law Firm's deep dive into topics and issues that affect businesses, which might be relevant as well. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on email. LinkedIn, I'd just be Darshan Kulkarni. On email, you can reach me at darshan@kulkarnilawfirm.com. And on Twitter, see the Darshan Talks is often a good place, but I'll be honest, I tend to use the other 2 more. I feel like Twitter is not as hot as it used to be, though a lot of people would disagree with me on that one. But yeah, so that's sort of a little bit about me. I'm happy to answer more. I'm on a couple of different boards. I do a fair bit of writing. And compounding is one of those things that I've been passionate about, since like 2006, 2007, when I actually went to Mediska, took a course on compounding pharmacy before compounding pharmacy was as big as it is.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, you have like all these different hats and lenses that you look at the space through from, an attorney perspective, pharmacist perspective. I guess my question is like, how do those different lenses that you're looking through change or affect the way that you look at compounding or personalized medicine?
I think I come at it very in my head, and I think all of us have a slightly different take on this, but I think we all come at it from the perspective, what is best for the patients? And I think the word best is defined by each of us slightly differently. I come at it from can you give proven safety and efficacy to the patient? Can you make sure that what the patient gets is what's best for the patient? A lot of people disagree with me and they say that's all well and good, but can the patient actually afford it? Can the patient actually get it in their hands? And that's what's best for the patient. And those are 2 reasonable positions to take, but I would argue that what is cheapest may need to be curtailed, may need to be organized in a way that is more proven. And I'll go the other way as well. What is safe and efficacious needs to be affordable. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? So I think that balance is what we're all struggling with. And that's really the genesis. That's the birth of compounding that has become as big as it has in the last 4 or 5 years. So we can talk about that, and we'll talk about it a lot more because let's be honest, it's Amy Summers, and you can talk about anything.
Yeah, I'm asking you questions today. Well, I guess you said stuff about like it's got to be proven safe and effective, but isn't that the crux of compounding in general? Like these things haven't gone through the FDA approval process, so they can't say particularly that they are safe and effective.
So I teach a course on food and drug law, and I say in the end, if you're talking to, and I said this in front of some of the FDA lawyers that I know as well, they're like, holy crap, I hadn't actually thought of it that way. But in the end, the FDA has jurisdiction only over 4 things. That's all they have jurisdiction over. You have to prove 2 things, and you have to prove that the other 2 things are not true. You have to prove that every drug is safe and efficacious. And we're talking about drugs, but this applies generally to, like, for example, medical devices as well. But you have to prove that every drug is safe and efficacious, and you have to prove that it is not adulterated or misbranded. So if you can prove those 4 things, you're in good stead. The FDA does not get into affordability, for example. That's not their business. On the other hand, access is very much an element from a safety and efficacy standpoint. So if we think about compounding as where it started in a more serious way, that was probably about 2009, when the FDA suddenly came on and said, we're going to be really, really onerous about how we expect these generic drugs to be made. A bunch of generic companies basically came out and said, we can't do it. We literally can't meet the requirements you have. So they stopped making these drugs. And I remember working in the pharmacy. I was working at a hospital, and all these drugs, 200 odd drugs, went on shortage suddenly. And these are patients who are chemo patients. And these are patients who are going, I need access to these drugs. And we were suddenly gone. And that's when compounding came in. And that's when compounders said, you know what? We're going to step in. We're going to have saline for you. We're going to have we're going to make product from API. And that's when we were like, this is awesome. And then no good deed goes unpunished. And you had the NECC tragedy, because you suddenly had compounders going, you know what if I just manufacture without a license? And that's what happened. And the NECC tragedy, for those people who don't remember, this is 2013. You had 600 people injured. I think 60 people died. And the pharmacist is now in jail. I think it was murder. I could be wrong. It may be a different charge. And then things kind of quietened down for a while. Compounding didn't go away. We basically got the 503A and 503B out of that. And then 2020 happened. And we had pharmacists basically going, look, you are saying, you Lilly, you Novo are coming out and saying that we want access to these drugs. And but you don't have enough drugs. So patients want them. You don't have them. It is on shortage by definition. And compounding pharmacies came in and filled the gap. And I would argue that, you know what, compounding pharmacies filled the gap at that point. But then everyone discovered it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And now compounding pharmacies came out and said, we are going to make claims. And we see those claims from, shall we say, some unscrupulous vendors. I'm not necessarily sure it's necessarily the compounding pharmacists in that case. It's actually the telemedicine providers in many cases. And sometimes the doctors in many cases, who are coming out and saying things about these products that are simply not true. Things like, my version is better than, well, based on what proof? My version is safer than, based on what? Your drug hasn't even been shown to be safe or efficacious. But what you can say about your drug is that it is not adulterated or misbranded. And that, I assume, you can actually show. But the moment you start making claims about it's better than, you might land up being misbranded still. And that's the line you're trying to sort of address. You can't prove the safety and efficacy of a particular drug. You can prove the adulteration or misbranding requirements. And that's where we're having a lot of fights, because you have telemedicine providers, large compounders coming out and basically making their own products. They're taking drugs like ABC drug and mixing it with a vitamin and saying it's a whole new drug. Well, if it's a whole new drug, then you need to go through a 55B1, B2, or J pathway. You can't just suddenly bring it on, manufacture it wholesale, and then sell it and say, you know what, I'm still a compounding pharmacy. And those, I think, are the balances you're trying to draw in each case.
So when you advise companies in these FDA-regulated industries, what patterns do you keep seeing over and over again?
You're talking across all the industries or specifically compounding?
Yeah, the ones that you serve. I think we talked a little bit about advertisement,
Yeah.
clinical trials,
Sure.
compounding.
Yeah. I think you see a variety of variety of issues sort of pop up as commonalities. Some elements go to sort of unapproved claims. And this is true not just for compounders, this is true for like straight up manufacturers, where they're making claims that simply aren't supported by the science. So in the case of a lot of the manufacturers, you have someone who's going to go in and it's usually what's called an MLR committee, Medical Legal Regulatory Review Committee. As they are in almost every single medical device company and or drug company. And they look at the claims you're making. And they say, okay, from a medical standpoint, is your label approved for this indication? If it's not, why are you making the claim? They'll say you have a deal with XYZ company. Does this work with what you have? That's your legal component. The FTC is coming out and looking at the claims you're making. The FDA is looking at the claims you're making. State boards are looking at the claims you're making. Now you've got the boards of pharmacy, the boards of medicine, the state attorney general's office. They're all coming out and saying what kinds of claims are you making. Clinical trials. You and I have worked through clients like this where pharmacies got really hot for a second there with CVS and with Walgreens, all trying to get into the clinical research world. But I feel like they came at it from a very different angle than the pharmacists I see involved in clinical research. They came at it from a overall, we've got access to patients, let us give you the access to the patients and we'll all make a bunch of money. That's kind of not how this works. Because in many cases, pharmacies don't know the actual prescribing code for what indication the medication is being used. And we both know as pharmacists that medications that are approved for one indication are routinely used for other indications. So those pharmacies have to sort of reset their expectations. So you saw them coming into sort of the COVID world, and they were like, we can give you access to patients overall, but you can't say anything about, you know what, I'm doing an Alzheimer's trial. And is this right for that Alzheimer's patients? You didn't have that data. So I think the controls in many cases simply don't exist. I think pharmacies in general are very good at the practice of health. They don't necessarily understand the different requirements that the FDA imposes. And my experience tends to be that they tend to hire people who are experts in health, but not people who understand what the FDA especially knows. And you've seen that, Amy, in a lot of the conversations you and I have had with clients you and I have shared. So I'd say that element. I think I routinely get involved in things like recalls. And what level of recall do you do? And who do you need to notify? And what are the implications of that? I get involved in those issues. And that's not just that's not just manufacturers. It's compounders, it's medical devices, food. I've been involved in all of those. And sometimes it's not the fault of any of them. It's often like the distributor who's selling. Actually was involved in a situation where this trucking company decided to found out that they sort of didn't store the product properly, and the manufacturer said, you can't like distribute this to our clients because that's a problem. So the insurance company that insured the trucker said, you know what, go sell it to this XYZ company. And they did. And now we're like, no, it's still our product. You can't sell an adulterated product. And that was the insurance company telling them to sell, which was very, very interesting.
Oh, that's odd. Interesting. You've been talking a lot of interesting things. What types of words or claims should compounders be especially cautious about? Things like safe, effective, FDA approved. I mean, those are maybe obvious ones that you can't be saying. But what are the kinds of words that compounders should be careful of when they're describing items in their website or other print materials?
So the FDA actually has a perspective on this, and I think it's one of those questions. And we get into this. There is a Supreme Court case that talks about how pharmacists have a lot more leeway. Then there are the FDA rules, and which rules do you follow? A lot of people will say, you know what, I'm going to take the Supreme Court, and that's why pharmacists sort of push that envelope a lot. And I would disagree with them, but that's a perspective, and it's a valid perspective. The FDA has its own perspective. The FDA says there are three types of ads. There are the disease awareness ads. So if you if you just want to talk about the disease itself, great, no problem. FTC has jurisdiction over it, no big deal. You can talk about just the drug awareness ad, which means that it's simply, I'm going to talk about this drug, Ozempic, for argument's sake. I'm not making any claims. I'm just putting the word Ozempic on your screen. No big deal. FTC still has jurisdiction. Now, when you connect the disease to the drug and you make claims, that's when they want you to have what's called fair balance. And there are a bunch of other requirements. I'd once gone in and actually charted this out. It's about 400 odd questions you have to ask. So, and this was in 2017. So things have exponentially gone up since then. But it goes to the types of claims you can make. And pharmacists routine, and in those cases, they're based on approvals by the FDA. Pharmacists don't have approvals. Despite what you're saying, you do not have approvals. And that's why you're seeing Google and Facebook target pharmacies and saying, we're going to ban you because you're making claims that are not approved. And I think you've got to be careful because you don't want your pharmacy itself banned. Now, what kinds of claims can you make? So what kinds of claims shouldn't you make? Safety, efficacy, obviously, you can't make those claims. Comparative claims, you don't have the ability to make those claims. You shouldn't be making claims about FDA approved, like you just pointed out. Now, what should you do, for example?
Yeah, like what can you say then if you can't say like this or that?
So theoretically speaking, you are allowed to make claims about the disease. You are allowed to make claims about the drug. You are allowed to go out there and engage in what's called scientific discussion. So scientific discussion is when one scientist talks to another, not a marketer, but a scientist talks to another, i.e. a pharmacist talks to another pharmacist and goes, look, here's how we're using this product. We've seen it used in XYZ ways. FDA has no jurisdiction over that. That's what medical affairs does. Now, the moment you start incentivizing that pharmacist to say, have that discussion, if you sell X amount of product, we're going to then incentivize you, we'll give you more money, that's a problem. So those are the types of checks and balances you want to have. You might want to have an MLR committee to look at that. I've actually advised clients, I think you were part of one of the transactions we were working on, where that pharmacy, I still look back at them and they're still compliant, and I love them for it because their ads are straight on point. They're incredible. They never make claims about how safe or efficacious their drug is, but they make claims about the service they give. They make claims about how they're accessible to patients. All of that is completely okay. And that's what we do as pharmacists. We're looking out for the patients. So talk about that. You're not a product manufacturer. You are a services provider. And the truth is, pharmacists do that better than most other people. So why are we not talking about that's our core skill set? And I'd love to see more off that, which is, you know what, in the end, if you have a question, you can call Bob, and Bob's going to pick up the phone call and talk to you. And that, I think, is the value. But the thing is, you can't scale that. And that's where the problem comes in. But what about if you start adding things like technology? You use a Kindle, Alexa, or any kind of AI to engage in that. There are rules that you need to follow, but there are ways to start leveraging that to help pharmacists as we continue. So something to think about.
Visual learners out there, though, still, I'm wondering what on your website as a compounder, can you say, we have drug A?
Yeah, absolutely.
At this and just that's it.
That's it.
Can you say something like same active ingredient as?
Is it the same active ingredient? And because
how else would you describe it? Like if it's if it has lisinopril in it.
Mm-hmm. So let's say it's lisinopril for argument's sake, right?
Yeah.
You can say lisinopril, but is it the same API? Because they may not follow the same specs that a branded manufacturer might follow. Number two, you cannot compare it to a branded product because you never did the testing for that. So same API as suggests to something else, and that may not have happened. So I think those are the limitations you need to be aware of, and you're seeing the lawsuits that go along with it, where manufacturers are coming back suing pharmacies for saying, you cannot compare yourself to me because you never proved that. And if you did, bring it to the FDA, let's have that conversation, but you didn't. And we have exclusivity, we have patent rights, et cetera, that go along with it.
Can they say something like compounded alternative or personalized version?
You?
What's that?
No, compounded alternative, a personalized version to what? You still have to name
I don't know if they're
it.
making a comparison or if they're just saying
It is, though.
lisinopril, compounded version.
Yeah, but
Can they say that?
The moment you say you name the brand product, you have trademark law that comes into question. And trademark law basically says that so there's something called dilution. And what that in trademark law, what that basically means is that I'll give you an example. There was a Supreme Court decision. It was a company called Victor's Little Secret. And as you can imagine, Victoria's Secret was not very happy with them. And the argument was Victoria's Secret made the claim that Victor's Little Secret does not devalues our brand. It dilutes our brand. So the same claim that you would make as a branded manufacturer is when you say things like compounded version of Ozempic, lisinopril, whatever it is, you're now diluting their brand. And that's the argument that gets made. Because let's say your product, and we've seen this happen, where when you test it, the specs don't line up, and the bioavailability is different, the AUC is different, the Cmax, Tmax is different. In those specific situations, the branded product looks worse because now you're saying you said it was similar to or a version of, and that's a problem. And you can get into that from a trademark perspective. You can get into that. That's the Lanham Act is the other angle. There's the anti-competitive versions of that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll have both state and federal claims that can go along with it.
Continuing on with this discussion, if there's a website or a print material, and then at the end of it, it has some kind of disclaimer, not FDA approved.
So,
why not?
So people seem to think, I just had this situation with a client where they want to do all of these things and then just put a disclaimer saying not FDA approved. You can't get past all of this just by putting a disclaimer at the end. Another version of that I've seen is where people will say, this thing is amazing. This is the best thing out there. And I don't necessarily just mean the compounded version. You see this in the branded version as well. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like small, tiny font on the other side. It's like, not been approved. It might cause weight loss, might cause death. Like, I spoke to the FDA. I spoke to OPDP, for example. And one of the questions that they said, a good test, they said, was your risks and benefits. Switch them. Are you still happy? If you are, that's a good sign. So if you would have switched all those efficacy claims you made with your disclaimer at the bottom, would you be happy? Probably not. And that's a good litmus test to use.
Let's say you are really trying to do as you're talking about, and you come across a lot of studies. So, lisinopril was shown in these gazillion studies to help with blood pressure or decrease it by this amount over. Can or should a compounder be considering that kind of language, like in this study, this kind of thing happened?
Multiple reasons you can't do that. So the first reason is purely from a study standpoint. You have no idea what those the people who did the study used. So they may have had their own version of lisinopril. You don't know what limits and specs they used in that test. So you can't apply that to your product. So purely from a comparison standpoint, it doesn't work. A really good example of this is 23andMe. I want to say probably about 2018, 2017, maybe. They were making all these claims, and you may remember this, where they were like, this test shows that you have a 50% chance of getting XYZ disease state in like breast cancer in 15 years. And they were like, here's the study to prove that. And the FDA said, how do I know that study test applies to your test? And they're like, there are a bunch of studies. Yeah, but doesn't necessarily apply to your test. And it's the exact, and they had to go back, and they went from making like 50 claims to like 4. Because they went and proved those to the FDA. And this is the same thing you see in pharmacogenomics. You'll see a lot of pharmacists will want to make all those claims. Now, there's a difference. There's a big difference between the manufacturer making the claim and the pharmacist making the claim, because the manufacturer is engaged in what's called commercial speech. So they have certain metes and bounds they have to follow. So the government's allowed to regulate commercial speech, scientific discussion. So if Amy's talking to Darshan and we're both pharmacists, FDA has no jurisdiction to go, you know what, two scientists talking to each other, I'm going to tell you what to say. That's not your business. It gets what's called strict scrutiny. And the government has to prove that they have a compelling government interest in regulating that speech. But the moment you take that exact scenario and now I incentivize Amy and say, you know what, Amy, every time Darshan prescribes it now, I'm going to give you an extra $1. Now, Amy is not just a scientist. She's a salesperson who happens to wear a lab coat. And that was the GSK $3 billion fine in 2013.
Let's take a turn to the other hot topics that we're hearing lately about, dare I say, peptides. I think I know your stance on them. So from your perspective, what do you think makes peptides uniquely challenging from a legal, regulatory, and even promotional standpoint?
I think you and I had this conversation just before we jumped on, where I think we all come at it from what is the best interest of patients. And again, that gets read in two different ways. The first way it gets read is, you know what? We have a product that has established safety and efficacy. We want to make sure that the patients only get products that have established safety and efficacy. That's the position I tend to take. And I'll be honest, I'm not always consistent with that. So just want to be clear about that. I'm calling out what I think is an ideal world. There are exceptions to that. On the other hand, there's a school of thought out there. And RFK Jr. has come out and said that he's part of the school of thought, where he goes, you know what? We want patients to be able to, if they're going to get it anyways, we want patients to get peptides from sources that are trustworthy. So I would argue that trustworthy to do what? So you have to show that the product is safe and efficacious and not adulterated or misbranded. You might be able to show adulterated or misbranded, assuming you had specs in place. But those specs have always got to be based on the safety and efficacy of the product itself. In the case of peptides, you have no data out there on safety and efficacy. Now, I've seen the discussions and arguments out there that, you know what, we have a PCAC meeting coming and they're going to submit data that's going to prove that it's safe and efficacious. But it goes back to, for me at least, it goes back to that original discussion we were having, which is, this is like that situation where 23andMe was saying, we have all these papers that show that this can be used in breast cancer or whatever it was. Yeah, maybe, but how does that apply to you? We don't have that data.
Do you think somebody has that data?
I don't know how you could do that. I mean, you'd have to generate that data. I'm not saying you couldn't generate it. You absolutely could. But at that point, the cost of generating that data to show that the safety, efficacy, the AUC, the Cmax, Tmax, the clinical efficacy for a particular peptide for a particular indication is what it is, you absolutely can generate all of it. If you're going to do that, though, the cost rises. And they're going to go, I'm going to go get it approved. And then you've defeated the entire point. I'm a fan of looking out for the patient. As are you, as is everyone, as is every pharmacist I know. What does looking out mean is the question. I think that's what we all struggle with. So I think peptides have a harder pill to swallow. Ignore the word peptide for a second. If someone came to me and said, you know what, I'm making up a thing. I'm going to take XYZ product. It's never been shown to be safe and efficacious, but I'm going to take it. Do I, as a clinician, have a responsibility to try to now provide it to them in a as safe as possible route? Or do I have a responsibility to go, I can't be part of this because I know about this? Go ahead.
Not to cut you off, but philosophy, I didn't major in it, but I have this question is like, what made the patient get there in the first place? Did they try the surgery and fail it? Did they try the whatever it was and it didn't work? And now they're just like, I have no other thing to lose. I'm going to try this thing knowing full well that it's not proven. But I keep hearing anecdotes of so and so getting a good result or it worked for them or those kinds of things.
I think those arguments work in clinical research in like patients who have cancer, for example. What argument worked for some guy who's trying to work in the gym and just wants an extra bicep curl? I think that indication, it's relative risk. It goes to disease state in question. Like, I'm willing to tolerate my arm falling off if it's cancer, but I'm not necessarily willing to tolerate my skin peeling off if it's an allergy. And that's the distinction. The disease state matters.
Excellent. I want to hit some things as I know we're already...
I have a call in 4 minutes, by the way.
Yes. I wanted to do something about M&A, mergers and acquisitions. I personally get asked all the time, like, if I have any pocket listings, if I get, new folks, they want to get into the industry, or how does one find a deal to be had, even a deal, not necessarily like a cheap deal, but like, how does one that's looking to get into this business even find a good listing?
You're talking about a buyer. How do they find a potential deal? I think the best place to start often is, number one, go to the conferences, talk to the pharmacists who are exhibiting. Pharmacy is a closely knit community. We may disagree with each other, but we love each other. If one of us is struggling, someone else probably knows. Find out what they're saying. Talk to someone like Amy Summers. She's amazing. She goes everywhere. She knows everything everyone's saying. Talk to her. Talk to Darshan and go, hey, have you heard of anything? You can talk to a broker, and a broker might be able to find you something. It all depends on what your budget is. It all depends on what you're dealing with. You might, depending on the budgets you're working with, you might go to a private equity company. You might go to a venture capitalist company. You might go to a pharmacy. Each of those has their own budget, if you will. The more developed they are, the higher the budget. So the amount of de-risking you want, the more expensive it becomes. You want to buy Darshan's pharmacy, you can have it for steal. You want to buy Amy's set of pharmacies where she set up policies, procedures, everything, probably going to cost you a little bit more. You then want to buy pharmacy that's already has a telemedicine company in it, and they've sort of done the deals. Again, you've de-risked it. You have a higher level of deals, and you want those policies, you want those procedures. It's going to be a little bit more expensive. Going all the way up to, like, I want to buy Hims. Well, that's going to be a lot more expensive at that point, isn't it? Because they've got all of that and more. They've got a really good marketing campaign and marketing setup. So overall, that conversation, finding out a little bit more, knowing the right people in the space to talk to, all of that helps.
Thank you so much. This has been such an amazing conversation. I think there's some controversial tones in here, but I think it makes for a good debate. And I just want to thank you again for being on. And I think that's it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.